The world was not yet ours. The wind carried the scent of giants, massive silhouettes that haunted the horizon, creatures whose very breath could shake the air. When the first humans looked across the savannah, they were not the top predators. They were prey. And survival wasn't a right. It was a fragile negotiation with a world still ruled by monsters. Imagine a dusk without safety, when the sun's descent meant the rise of danger. The ground trembled beneath the steps of proboscideans, giant elephants with spiraling tusks. In the distance, packs of saber-toothed cats moved like shadows with purpose. Each night was a test of endurance, a race against the darkness itself. But even then, something was stirring within those fragile humans. They stood smaller, slower, and weaker, yet carried within their minds an ember that no beast could match. Curiosity. It was this restlessness that made them study the patterns of the stars, the whispers of the wind, and the trails left by predators. Curiosity gave birth to caution, and caution, in time, became wisdom. The early world was a stage of contrasts, vast grasslands stretched beneath skies dense with ash and dust from distant volcanoes. Forests were alive with sounds, screams, howls, and the rhythmic calls of life in constant peril. And amidst it all, tiny human bands sought refuge in caves and cliffs, building fragile sanctuaries where stories would one day be told. Yet, what did it mean to exist in a world where your child's cry could summon death? What decisions did early parents face when the night roared outside their shelters? To protect their offspring, they had to understand not only the predators that hunted them, but themselves. Fear was no longer a weakness. It became their teacher, shaping instincts that still echo through us. Every movement, every flicker of firelight was a defiance, a declaration that humanity, however frail, would not vanish quietly into the jaws of time. And so began an ancient struggle, one written not in words, but in the silent stares exchanged between predator and prey. If you're fascinated by this primal world, where survival meant standing against the impossible, don't forget to like this video and tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you had to protect your family in a world full of giants? Because in the next chapter, we'll step into that very darkness and meet the unseen hunters that ruled the prehistoric night. Night was the first true predator. When the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, the world turned into a theater of fear. In the silence that followed, early humans learned that darkness was never empty. It was alive, filled with eyes that glowed from the shadows. For Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis, the fall of night meant vulnerability, for they were surrounded by creatures faster, stronger, and hungrier than themselves. Imagine the crackle of a dying fire, the soft breathing of a family huddled together, and beyond the glow, something moves. The rustle of grass, a faint growl carried by the wind. The great cats of the Pleistocene were not the cautious predators we know today. They were fearless, relentless. The cave lion, larger than any lion alive, prowled with regal confidence. Packs of hyenas, powerful enough to crush bones, laughed in the dark as they closed in. And somewhere deeper in the night, the saber-toothed cat waited, its elongated canines gleaming under the pale light of the moon. For early humans, survival required a perfect balance between silence and awareness. Every sound became a signal, every shadow a potential threat. They developed a heightened sense of hearing, an instinctive vigilance that bordered on paranoia. They began to understand that the night was not their ally. It was an enemy that had to be studied, anticipated, and outwitted. But the darkness did more than terrify them. It taught them. Fear became information. Every loss, every encounter, every scream in the distance added to a growing archive of wisdom passed from one generation to the next. The humans who learned to read the forest's rhythm, who could sense the change in the wind or the stillness before an ambush, were the ones who lived to see another sunrise. Over time, small fires began to punctuate the blackness. Not yet powerful, but enough to push back the edge of the night. To a watching predator, the flicker of light meant something new. A creature that no longer ran, but fought back. A creature beginning to understand the rules of survival not through strength, but through observation and courage. The night still belonged to the beasts, but the humans had begun to change the script. The next step in their evolution would not be written in muscle or fang, but in flame. Fire was not discovered. It was conquered. Before it, humanity lived at the mercy of predators that ruled the night. Every flicker of flame was a rebellion against darkness, a fragile spark that could mean the difference between life and extinction. To the first humans, mastering fire was not a scientific breakthrough, it was an act of defiance, born from terror. Picture a storm tearing through the plains. Lightning strikes a tree, and for the first time, a group of trembling figures stares not in fear, but fascination. The fire devours everything it touches, yet its light holds something magnetic, something divine. They approach cautiously, knowing that to touch it is death, but to understand it is survival. It was the moment when instinct met intelligence, when curiosity overcame fear. At first, they carried fire timidly, protecting the embers inside hollowed stones and wooden shells. Their hands shook as they tried to keep it alive through rain and wind. Nights once filled with predators' roars began to change. The flicker of orange light kept the beasts at bay, and within that circle of warmth, humanity found something new: safety. But fire did more than protect. It transformed. It hardened wooden spears, cooked food, and illuminated the unknown. The glow of the flames reshaped the human mind, extending the day, giving them time to think, to plan, to imagine. Around it they told stories about gods of lightning, spirits of flame, and monsters hiding beyond the glow. For the first time, humans controlled an element that had once terrified them. Fear became a tool. Yet this mastery came with a dangerous price. The fire had to be fed, watched, and respected. Lose control, and it could consume everything they built. It was both ally and threat, mirroring the dual nature of the human spirit. Creation and destruction intertwined. In that trembling light, something greater was born: confidence. The first flickers of civilization glowed within the ashes of fear. And beyond the fire's edge, the predators watched in silence, realizing that the balance of power was beginning to shift. The night would never again belong entirely to them. And soon, the humans would learn that protection alone was not enough. They would have to fight back. In a world ruled by predators, parenthood was the most dangerous act of courage. Every cry of a newborn could summon death from the shadows. And yet, early humans dared to bring life into a landscape that constantly tried to extinguish it. Picture a cave at dawn. Smoke rises faintly from a dying fire as a mother shields her child beneath a pelt of animal hide. Outside, vultures circle over the remains of the night's hunt. Every sense is alert. The faintest sound, the softest rustle, could mean an approaching beast. In this fragile silence, survival was a heartbeat-by-heartbeat battle. Among early species like Homo erectus and later Homo heidelbergensis, family was not just instinct, it was strategy. Protecting the young meant protecting the future. Bands learned to move together, to guard the vulnerable in the center while the strong watched the perimeter. Each individual carried a role, and failure meant extinction. The struggle to defend, Offspring gave birth to something beyond survival. It gave birth to empathy. Predators like the saber-toothed cat or the giant hyena targeted the weak, testing the courage of parents who stood between their children and death itself. Archaeological evidence tells of bones showing signs of defense wounds, suggesting that mothers and fathers quite literally threw themselves between predator and child. Their sacrifices echo through the ages in our very biology, the reflex to shield, to protect, to fight without thought. But protection came with choices no parent should face. When food was scarce or when danger grew too close, survival forced impossible decisions. Which fires to abandon, which cries to silence, which paths to take when safety meant leaving something behind. These were the moments that carved humanity's emotional depth, forging bonds stronger than any weapon. And through it all, love was their greatest rebellion. Against cold, against hunger, against predators that dwarfed them in power. Early humans chose to care. That choice changed everything. Cooperation deepened, trust grew, and from the ashes of fear rose the foundation of human connection. Even now, that ancient instinct still lives within us, the pulse that quickens when danger nears a child, the silent vow to protect, no matter the cost. It is not learned, it is remembered. If this glimpse into our earliest battles for love and survival speaks to you, share in the comments. Would you have had the strength to protect your family in a world where every shadow could kill? Because next, we'll see how humanity's courage transformed into strategy, when the hunted dared to become the hunter. There was a time when humans ran, when the sound of a snapping branch meant only one thing: run faster, hide deeper, stay silent. But one day, something changed. Fear began to transform into focus. The hunted learned to read the mind of the hunter, and for the first time, survival wasn't just about escaping, it was about fighting back. Across the open plains of Africa and the cold valleys of Eurasia, humans began to experiment with unity. Alone, they were fragile. Together, they became a force nature had never seen before. Spears, sharpened stones, and coordinated movement replaced blind panic. A group could corner a beast larger than any single man could face. The moment they learned to move as one, the balance of power began to tremble. It started small: a wounded gazelle, an injured predator caught in a snare. But soon, entire herds and apex beasts fell before human cunning. The invention of the thrusting spear, and later the atlatl, gave distance to their courage. No longer did they need to face claws and teeth directly. From behind cover, they struck with precision and patience, learning how predators hunted so they could reverse the roles. Every successful hunt was more than a victory. It was a lesson. They learned to track by the faintest footprint, to read the movements of wind and shadow, to predict behavior the way a lion predicts the stumble of its prey. The same intelligence that once feared the dark was now weaponized against it. For the predators, something ancient shifted. The smell of fire and human sweat began to mean danger. Beasts that once ruled without challenge now watched from the distance, uncertain. The savannas echoed with new sounds: drums, chants, and the rhythm of organized pursuit. Humanity had become something else entirely, a predator of predators. Yet this transformation carried a silent tension. The same fire that gave them power demanded more food, more territory, more dominance. The equilibrium of the ancient world was breaking, one spear thrust at a time. Still, in that moment of awakening, the fragile species that once cowered in caves took its first steps toward destiny. Fear was no longer their master, it was their guide. And soon, even nature itself would test their newfound power in ways far beyond their control. The earth was never still. It shifted, cracked, and breathed destruction in cycles that tested every living thing. For early humans, the struggle for survival extended beyond predators. It was written in the very bones of the planet. The ground shook, the skies bled ash, and the winds carried both death and rebirth. Imagine a horizon darkened not by storm, but by fire. A volcano erupting with the force of gods, painting the sky in crimson clouds. Herds of mammoths thunder across the plains in terror. Predators, Smilodon, Megalania, cave bears, roam beneath the choking air, their dominance challenged by chaos itself. In this world of titans, humanity clung to existence at the thin edge between fury and adaptation. The climate was merciless. Icy ages froze the land into silence, then thawed into floods that swallowed valleys. Forests vanished overnight. The great predators that had ruled for millennia began to falter. But where others perished, humans observed, remembered, and adapted. They followed the migrations of animals, learned to anticipate the seasons, and turned nature's violence into opportunity. Smilodon, the saber-toothed cat, once the embodiment of perfection, struggled as its prey disappeared. The colossal short-faced bear, taller than a man on two legs, prowled with desperate hunger. Even the mighty Megalania, a venomous giant lizard of Australia, found itself competing with a new kind of predator, one that fought not with strength, but with intellect. For early humans, these beasts were not myths. They were reality. Every encounter was a test of nerve and unity. A single mistake could mean extinction. But their minds had evolved into tools sharper than any fang. They watched the ways predators stalked and mirrored them. They studied the landscape, moving like ghosts through the terrain, reading the earth's signs as if decoding its secrets. And when disaster struck, when ash fell like snow and beasts vanished from the land, they endured, where the giants of the Pleistocene failed to adapt. Humans reshaped the rules of existence. Each generation grew more cunning, more resourceful, more dangerous. The roar of the sky and the silence of extinction forged a new kind of survivor, one that would soon challenge even the gods of nature themselves. But the next evolution would not be of body nor of tool. It would come from the mind, the weapon no predator could ever match. Strength alone could no longer decide who lived and who perished. In a world of claw and fang, early humans began to wield something far more lethal, the power of thought. It was invisible, silent, and unstoppable. Strategy became their spear, imagination their shield. At first, intelligence was instinct shaped by experience. Hunters studied the patterns of predators and prey, the shifting winds, the language of tracks left in the dirt. But soon, awareness evolved into foresight. They began to plan not for the moment, but for the future. The concept of anticipation was born, and with it, the human advantage. Picture a hunting party moving through the mist. Their movements are deliberate, coordinated, almost rehearsed. Each member knows where to stand, when to move, how to channel the herd toward a trap set hours before. The kill, when it comes, is not chance. It's the result of shared understanding. This was more than survival. It was the dawn of strategy, of communication, of trust. The voice became a weapon, too. Through gesture, rhythm, and primitive speech, humans transferred knowledge faster than evolution could shape their bodies. Stories around the fire weren't mere tales. They were lessons encoded in memory, maps of danger and wisdom passed through generations. The tribe that could teach was the tribe that endured. With intellect came empathy, the ability to predict not only the actions of prey, but the intentions of one another. Groups became communities. The concept of we emerged. No longer isolated, humans became extensions of each other's will, transforming cooperation into survival itself. And this mental evolution didn't just protect them, it redefined them. While predators relied on instinct, humans built upon imagination. They sculpted stone, tamed the hunt, and turned observation into dominance. The mind became their greatest adaptation, reshaping every encounter with nature into an opportunity. Intelligence turned the fragile species into architects of fate. They no longer merely reacted to the world. They began to shape it. The age of survival had become the age of mastery. Tell me in the comments, do you think intelligence was humanity's greatest strength or its most dangerous weapon? Because next, we'll explore the shadows left by this new power, the ancient fears and instincts that still linger in our blood. The beasts are gone, but their shadows never left us. Deep within every heartbeat, in every startled glance at the dark, echoes the memory of a world that once hunted us. Fear, that ancient companion, is not the weakness. It is inheritance. When early humans faced the monsters of prehistory, fear was the difference between life and death. It sharpened the senses, froze the body at the sound of a growl, and whispered when to run, when to fight, when to stay silent. Over countless generations, it became part of our design, etched into our very blood. And though the saber-toothed cat and the giant hyena are long extinct, the instincts they awakened still prowl within us. You can still feel it, the tightening of the chest in darkness, the chill when something moves unseen, the reflex to protect a loved one without thought. These are not modern anxieties. They are ancient codes written by survival itself. The fear of snakes, of shadows, of predatory eyes staring from the unknown, all are relics of the Pleistocene, echoes of the time when humanity trembled but endured. Yet fear also gave rise to imagination. The same terror that once froze our ancestors beneath the stars became the seed of myth. They saw spirits in storms, gods in fire, monsters in the night, attempts to name what they could not control. Over millennia, stories replaced roars, but the feeling remained the same. Awe, reverence, and the instinct to survive against forces greater than ourselves. We are the descendants of those who learned not to banish fear, but to live with it. Every triumph of civilization, fire, shelter, tools, cities, was built from that primal need to protect, to endure, to make sense of the chaos that once hunted us. Even now, in a world of concrete and technology, the old fears find new faces. The jungle became the city, the predators became invisible. And perhaps that is what still drives us, to conquer what we fear, and in doing so, to remember who we are. Because beneath our reason, beneath our progress, the echoes of blood still call us back to the wilderness. But not all instincts could be silenced. Some were meant to resurface when the final confrontation between man and nature arrived. It began as survival, but it ended as conquest. The last great struggle between humanity and the megafauna was not fought in rage, but in inevitability. The balance that had once defined the wild was collapsing. For hundreds of thousands of years, the earth had been ruled by the colossal, the swift, the fierce. But now, a smaller, weaker creature, armed only with cunning and fire, stood ready to claim dominion. Across continents, the story repeated. Herds of mammoths fell beneath volleys of spears. Cave lions fled from expanding human territories. Even the titanic short-faced bears and saber-toothed cats, once kings of their realms, began to vanish. The hunters had become too efficient. Fire drove the beasts from their dens. Traps turned their strength into vulnerability. For the first time, the predators feared us, but victory carried silence. The roaring nights that once echoed with life grew still. Forests that had trembled beneath the steps of giants became empty, their rhythms broken. The extinction of the great beasts was not only a triumph of intelligence, it was the death of a world. And though humans could not see it then, they had begun to unravel the very web that had sustained them. Still, for those who lived through it, this was the age of ascension. Around the fire, stories were told of battles against monsters, of courage that defied impossible odds. These tales became the first myths, the origin of our fascination with beasts and heroes, with the eternal duel between light and shadow. The predators that once hunted us were reborn as symbols, reminders of what we overcame, and warnings of what we lost. Yet deep within that triumph lingered an unease. The fire that once protected now burned forests. The intelligence that had ensured survival now reshaped the land. The victory over nature had cost something vital. The balance between respect and dominance. The shadows of the past never vanished. They merely changed form. And as the last echoes of roaring giants faded into the wind, humanity stood alone beneath the stars, safe, powerful, and uncertain. Because even in triumph, one truth remained: the struggle between light and shadow was not over. It had only moved inward, into the heart of humankind itself. The world we know is quiet now. The roars of Smilodon, the thunder of mammoth herds, the screams of the night, they're gone. But something of that ancient world remains within us. Every heartbeat, every reflex, every spark of courage is an inheritance from those who refused to vanish when nature demanded surrender. We are their echoes, the survivors of a war against extinction. Imagine the first humans standing at dawn after a night of terror. The fire still burns, and the predators have retreated. For the first time, there is silence. Not safety, but possibility. That moment when fear gave way to awareness marked the beginning of us. From it rose language, art, faith, and the boundless curiosity that would one day take us beyond the stars. The instincts that once kept our ancestors alive have never truly left. They hide behind modern life, disguised in subtle ways: the rush of adrenaline before a leap, the tightening chest in darkness, the fierce protection of a child. Beneath civilization's calm, we remain creatures of survival, shaped by blood and memory. Our triumph over the ancient world was never about dominance. It was about endurance, about the refusal to give in to chaos. Every invention, every discovery is a continuation of that same primal defiance. Fire became technology, shelter became home, strategy became science. And yet, the essence remains the same: the will to live, to adapt, to protect. Even now, the earth changes again. New challenges rise where old ones fell. The climate shifts, species disappear, and humanity once more faces the question that has haunted it since the dawn of time. Will we adapt, or will we perish? The story of survival never ended. It only evolved, because the legacy of those who faced the monsters and storms is still within us. Their courage flows in our veins. Their fear guides our caution. Their strength built the world we stand on. We are not separate from them. We are their continuation, the living proof that against every force of nature, the human spirit endures. So if you've traveled this far, through the shadows of time, through fire and fear, take a moment to remember them. The nameless ones who faced the giants so we could inherit the earth. And if this journey moved you, share this story, leave your thoughts below, and let's keep their memory alive, because the instinct that once saved us still beats within us all.